Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever really struggled in life or faced depression, alcoholism, an eating disorder, or a hole in your belly you just couldn't fill, or if you simply love animal stories and their incredible power to heal, then do we have the show for you. Today I'll be talking with Shannon Kopp, an eating disorder survivor, animal welfare advocate, and the best-selling author of Pound for Pound, a story of one woman's recovery and the shelter dogs who loved her back to life. Today we'll talk about big struggles and challenges, how to overcome them, and finding that one thing that brings you your love to overcome. Plus, we'll talk about miraculous shelter animals, their stories, their struggles, and how they can nurse us all back to health. Plus, Jane Goodall and chimpanzees, the Ocean Beach Dog Park, sugar, Sunny, and why Cheese Whiz is the answer when you're going on TV. Just ask Abby. So welcome to the show, Shannon. Are you ready to shine?
I'm ready.
Woohoo!
And so is Bella.
All right, Bella. What kind of poochie is Bella?
Bella is a terrier poodle mix.
No wonder, because she's got what's look like hair instead of fur. It's more poodly.
Yes, she is quite poodly.
So she's hypoallergenic.
Yes.
Fantastic. So on that note, before we dive into things, can you tell us about Sugar, your childhood dog?
Sure, yes. So I am very grateful that when I was in the 4th grade and my sister was in 1st grade, my family adopted a Bichon Frise. We named her Sugar, and which is a little bit ironic because I did go on to have quite an addiction to sugar, but my grandmother always called me Sugar as a child, and it meant I can't love you enough. You're the sweetest thing I've ever seen. And so it seemed the perfect name for my first dog. And Sugar lived about 14 years. And during that time, she was my constant. And she also served as a profound source of comfort for my mother and my sister as my father dealt with alcoholism and all the horrors that come along with that disease. So, I learned very quickly as a child that there was nowhere I felt safer than when Sugar was in my lap. Something about her really steadied me, brought me out of my head and into the moment, pulled me just back to earth, back to the ground. And she also inspired so much joy. She found joy in the simplest things, a patch of grass, a warm, ray of sunlight. It didn't take much to make her happy. And when there was so much sadness going on in my childhood, it was, very powerful just to look at her and observe her in her joy.
It's so cool to see how an animal, even a small little animal, it doesn't matter size-wise, can make such a difference, not just in our life, but in a moment. Moment, because you're like, they're saying life is good. I know we had our dog Pumpkin. She was a coyote mix that we rescued. Wow. And she passed away at 17. She'd actually had cancer on and off for almost 10 years, and she was an amazing survivor. And at the end, on her very last day, and she knew this was it. This was her last day here on Earth, and she wanted to play with a grasshopper, and then she looked up at us, and she's like, life is good. Life is good. And she had a tumor that was basically taking her life, and we let her go naturally. But she was on her last day expressing that in this moment, everything is perfect, just as it is.
Yes.
So if we go from there, if we back up to before your biggest challenges began, why was Jane Goodall your hero?
Oh, gosh. I grew up in Connecticut and then in Pennsylvania, and there's a zoo, the Pittsburgh Zoo, that I would go to, and I was completely fascinated and enthralled by monkeys and particularly chimpanzees. And I began reading Jane Goodall's books, and I realized that she had done something no one else had done. She had gone into the jungle and discovered how intelligent chimpanzees are, that they're actually highly intelligent, emotional beings that can communicate cognitively and physically with each other and even with people. She was the first person that discovered that they can use tools. And really, I think there was something, I would read about how when she was a little girl, she would bring earthworms into her bed, and how she's also a huge dog lover. And I think that, we're all born with something very special about us when we come into
Mm-hmm.
this world. And ever since I've been a little girl, and it sounds like you're quite similar, I light up around animals. I I come into my authentic true self. And Jane Goodall was my role model. I dreamed of someday living in the jungle, and being as close and intimate with
Mm-hmm.
animals as she was with chimpanzees.
Beautiful. So, growing up then, um, started off great, I guess. You had a very strong relationship with your father, and then what started to happen?
So I was very close to my dad. He's a wonderful person, has a beautiful soul, but alcoholism is a horrific disease. And it runs in my family as well as mental illness and other addictions. And early into high school, he began being just very angry, rageful when he was sober. And then he was a businessman, and when he would travel, he would sometimes disappear and not come home. And eventually, this led to lots of hospitalizations, rehabs,
Mm-hmm.
and because I think he had been so successful in other areas of his life, in work and in sports, he had a lot of difficulty asking for help.
Yeah.
And I think as someone that suffered from addiction, that's the key component. Surrender is where it all begins. And sadly, he's been unable to do that to this day. And there was a lot of secrecy, a lot of shame that I think as his daughter, I took on.
Mm-hmm.
I believed that somehow if I could make him smile with good grades, or doing something well in a sports game or at dance, or if I could just be big enough, bigger than the addiction, inspire him to get better, that he would. I really didn't understand what alcoholism was, neither did my mom or my sister, and we just kept trying to rescue him, and that resulted in a lot of traumatic memories, finding him face down on the floor, nearly dead sometimes. He just simply could not stop drinking himself to death.
And thank you for sharing. It sounds like during this time, age 16, I guess actually age 17, that you started, your foundation started crumbling as well. Your dad was your foundation, and as he crumbled, it was your turn.
Yeah, definitely.
So what happened, or how did you first experience, if you don't mind me asking, bulimia?
So I began experimenting with dieting very casually. I had friends in high school that were dieting,
Oh
only
yeah, you had
eating.
like a frappuccino diet, or a
Yeah, my
bagel frappuccino diet.
yes. I figured liquids, I just would have frappuccinos all the time. And then I started doing more research. And, this society just gives us about a billion different options. The dieting industry is $1 billion industry,
Mm-hmm.
and they thrive off of all these different, just presenting you with all these different kind of fairy tale ideas that if you somehow control your food, your life will be in control. If you
Mm-hmm.
somehow look good on the outside, you're going to feel good on the inside. And I really was wanting to feel better. I felt very lost, very confused. I was grieving my father, and in a sense, my mother too, because she was really lost in his addiction and trying to save him. I felt a lot of grief inside, but I didn't know what to do with that grief. I felt, well, he's not dead physically.
Mm-hmm.
And I, also was suffering from clinical depression. I didn't know it at the time. And so the idea of just getting that perfect body felt, it, it was like, oh, well, maybe that is it. I kept looking for, you mentioned that hole inside. That's going to fill me up. That's going to make everything okay. And I think we all want life to be simpler,
Mm-hmm.
and we want the solutions to our complex problems to be easy, and that's what the dieting industry promised me. And so I began dieting, I began working out, And one day, a friend at school mentioned to me that she purged and that it actually felt good and that she felt so empty after. And I remember the way her eyes lit up when she said that. And then I was eating dinner, and my mother and sister were arguing, and I just kept eating. It was a broccoli and cheese casserole,
Mm-hmm.
eating and eating and eating, and kind of entering that state of just you're so full, you're numb. You're not thinking anymore about your problems, about mom and sister fighting, about dad being in rehab. You're thinking, oh, this is a lot of food. Oh, this tastes really good. Oh, what am I gonna do to work this off? And your mind kind of goes there.
Mm-hmm.
And I just decided I'm just gonna throw this up, and went upstairs to the bathroom and did it for the first time, and immediately thought, I'll never do this again. It's so disgusting. It's painful. My eyes hurt. My throat hurts. My mouth hurts. And yet I looked in the mirror after, and I guess the insanity of the disease began then. Even though, of course, I wasn't physically lighter, I felt like I was. I felt like I had lost weight. And I felt emotionally lighter. I felt like I was not only throwing up food, but I was throwing up my rage and my anger and that bad grade I got and that guy that didn't like me. It just felt like a very um, all-encompassing, all-consuming release. And I think for the 8 years I suffered from bulimia, I was looking to feel that way again.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like a drug addict who has their first hit and is continually seeking that high. And I never really got there again. But that's where it began for me.
It sounds like, for lack of a positive word, seductive.
Yeah, very.
So you struggled with it through college. Or I guess from what I understand, it wasn't quite as bad with the group you were rolling with.
Mm-hmm.
But how did you end up first seeking therapy?
Well, I tried a little bit of therapy in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and really didn't. The man that I saw told me to drink water when I wanted to binge, and I just felt so like this person doesn't understand. I'm not, if I could drink water rather than eat until oblivion and throw up and hurt people and lie, then I would.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went to the counseling center at Providence College and had an amazing counselor that I saw basically every week except for the summers for 4 years. And after that, I've had another counselor that I've been seeing for the past 10 years.
Yay.
So therapy has played a huge role in my life. And I'm really grateful that I was able to recognize pretty early on, even though I still believed in a large part that it wasn't a big deal and that I could fix it on my own, and all these delusions that we tell ourselves when struggling with addiction or mental illness. There must have been some part of my soul that knew I needed some extra help.
Yeah. There's a term that I hadn't heard before after you had left, I guess, Dr. Cameron's office in college, and you might find yourself in the cafeteria right away, and it was therapy amnesia.
Yes. Yeah, it seemed that, and I experienced this the entire 8 years I suffered from bulimia. I could write a book about how to recover and what to eat. I had so many techniques. I had relapse prevention plans up the butt. I mean, there was like, I knew on an intellectual level what to do, but that wisdom did not drop down to my heart where it really counts. It was all up here. And so I would sometimes I'd leave therapy feeling really inspired. Other times I'd go straight to the cafeteria or the fridge. And it was like in the moments I needed to remember most
Mm-hmm.
that to be present, to take a deep breath, to get outside, to call for help, I couldn't seem to do it. There was a disconnect between my mind and my heart, my intentions and my actions.
I want to ask more about that but before we get there, I want to go through a little bit more of your story. I'm fascinated. I ended up in Aix-en-Provence. You ended up in Cannes. Um, what was it like over there, and how are your challenges at that point?
So by that point, I was a junior in college,
Hmm.
and my family life had gotten even more dramatic. My father was still very sick, lots of life or death situations. One, in fact, that almost prevented me from getting to France. The day I was supposed to fly out, my mother found him lying close to dead on the floor. I almost missed my flight. And
I'm
so,
so proud of her. This was one of the most touching stories in there. Is the world is crumbling around you guys? It's like a blizzard. There's
yeah, there was a
nothing
blizzard.
going anywhere. And she pulls out her card and she says, "My daughter's getting to the airport,"
Mhm.
and got you a limo
Yes,
to get out
that
of
was the only
town.
form of transportation that would go in the storm. Yeah. Yeah, and my mother's always been my biggest supporter. I'm incredibly close to her. And she she did everything she could to get me kind of out of the bubble that was our alcoholic home and into a place I'd always dreamed of going. And France was, it felt like a dream when I
Mhm.
got there. I was from Connecticut, blizzard storms. It was sunny, not a cloud in the sky the day I got there. I met incredible people that I loved, and am still great friends with, but I was secretly continuing to suffer from the eating disorder, and I was there during the Cannes Film Festival. And so there was a lot of emphasis on appearances, lots of photographers, lots of celebrities there. And I felt even more pressure to focus on my appearance.
Mhm.
And that pressure didn't really come from the outside, it came from within me, this deep belief and ultimately delusion that if I could just make my appearance perfect, then I would begin to feel close to perfect inside. Or if I could just be physically beautiful, then someone could love me. Just really lacking a sense of wholeness and
Mhm.
completion and fulfillment and connection inside myself and really looking for it on the outside.
What did this quote mean to you? I didn't have any problems with the extraordinary. It was the ordinary where I ran into trouble. The moments in between the skydives and the mountain climbs.
Mm. Well, I used to lay on the beach with my friend Jimmy and listen to this song, Live Like You Were Dying, and
Hmm.
talks about, the final days of someone's life, going skydiving and all these amazing things. And I was all for that. I've always been an adventurer. I've bungee jumped. I've done all these things and I can really get into the moment and have fun, but I don't quite know what to do with myself when all that loud excitement is over. And my eating disorder was particularly strong and kind of that alluring, come to me every time I was feeling lonely or bored, or when my friends weren't around. I felt very vulnerable when I was alone with
Hmm.
myself. I used people to protect me from me. I knew I was less likely to end up binging and purging. And by that time in France, it it had developed into something where I could never just do it once.
Hmm.
It was happening, a dozen times. It was a cycle. It was like I binged and I purged, and then there I am spending money I don't have, going from restaurant to restaurant, hiding in bathrooms, throwing up blood, horrific things. And yet I couldn't stop myself. And so I felt safer around people. I felt safer and I think more human and normal when exciting things were happening.
Hmm.
But alone with myself, I really didn't know how to cope.
Makes sense. So, just about to start to go to some real positives here. I am very impressed. How did you manifest? It didn't work out very well, it doesn't sound like, but how did you manifest a meeting with Toni Morrison?
I ended up at
Because
an
she was like
event.
your idol too.
Oh God, Toni Morrison and Jane Goodall.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up at a fundraiser. They were looking for English-speaking volunteers during the Cannes Film Festival, raising money for AIDS research. And I knew, among other celebrities, Salma Hayek and Brittany Murphy and Jessica Alba and the Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen,
Mm-hmm.
that Toni Morrison was going to be there. And I was fortunate enough to be working with kind of the event director. I was helping him, and he asked me, if you could meet anyone, who would it be? And I said Toni Morrison. And then later in the evening, he asked me if I could show her to her seat. And there were all these things that I wanted to say to her. The Bluest Eye was my favorite book.
Mm-hmm.
All of her books I loved, and I really, similar to animals, books, well, actually, animals I think bring me more into the moment. Books help me kind of escape. Both are vessels for escaping the insanity of my thoughts and
Mm-hmm.
thinking. And whenever I read Toni Morrison's work, I was just in another world, this magical, real world that was full of suffering and reality and compassion and truth and poetry. And I wanted to tell her all those things. I wanted to tell her that she had changed my life. She made me want to be a writer. And I just couldn't find the words. So I ended up, saying nothing. and that was what happened. So I've always wished I could tell her in person what her work has meant to me. And that was the moment I could have done it, but I was too nervous.
Well, maybe your spirit will reach her through this show.
Yes.
So going from there, let's talk about a big positive, meeting Danny. How'd
Yes.
that happen?
After France, and graduating college, I moved out to California, kind of hoping that on the West Coast, I'd start this new life free of the eating disorder, free of the depression that I still was not getting any treatment for.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked at a hotel, and Danny was celebrating his 30th birthday. He invited me to come, and we had our first kiss that night. That was 9 years ago.
Wow.
And we started dating, and early on I said, you really don't want to date me, because what I found out is that I brought me with me to California, and I was sicker than ever. I was at my lowest of lows pretty quickly after I moved out here.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talk about it's when you're around others, you're better, and you had just unplugged from your network.
Yes, I was completely unplugged and binging and purging more than ever before, but also there was some kind of an emotional bottom I was hitting, just a complete sense of hopelessness that I would never, ever be free of this compulsion, and almost a sense of, if it kills me, it kills me. Just the sense of giving up and beyond help. Because at that point, I had been to therapy. I had read every book I could get my hands on, and I had moved to the West Coast, and I was not getting better. And yet somehow I managed in that dark place to also fall in love with someone, and for him to fall in love with me.
I was reading that in the book, I'm like, how did she pull it off?
I don't know. I don't know. But, in the
because
beginning,
you fell in love with a good guy. Because there are plenty of,
yes.
when you're in that low spot, it's real easy to find somebody who's going to help you be in an even lower spot.
And that was all I had done in high school and college. So this was a very different relationship for me. I didn't really get into relationships, honestly, before him. And he's just he's hilarious, and he made me laugh somehow when everything felt so dark and heavy and hopeless. Here was this person that was making me laugh. And in the beginning, I tried very hard to hide my eating disorder from him. I tried to hide my depression and what I was going through, but you come to a place where it's impossible. And so that's how we ended up having very quickly, I'd say 6 months after that kiss, I found myself sitting on Dog Beach with him. That was our favorite place to go. And
And Pumpkin, who I mentioned earlier, I don't know if it was on the show or before. I guess it was on the show. Pumpkin did get a chance to swim on Dog Beach.
yes, good for Pumpkin. Dog Beach, I think it's really the most incredible place. And it doesn't strike me, it makes all the sense in the world to me that that would be the place where I would have enough awareness to make a decision as important as seeking treatment. And Danny and I would go there a lot. And I remember one morning, I was just, you're surrounded by just all of this unleashed joy and dogs running into the water, leaping into these enormous waves, digging holes, running around you, playing with each other, licking your face. And it's just such a place of it's hard to not be in the moment there because you're surrounded by all these beings that are not only in the moment, but kind of over, just completely filled with joy and excitement. And I think that when you're in an environment like that, it helps to bring you into the moment. And in that moment, my throat was raw from purging the night before. My heart was heavy because I hadn't told Danny. I was tired of trying to hide it from him. Um, I, my head hurt. In the moment, it was like I felt the physical and the emotional and the spiritual effects of living with an eating disorder, and I knew I needed help. And that was the place that I told him, and he supported me.
Woo!
Yes.
and that is a place that just it's a slice of heaven. The amount of love emanating, open-heartedness emanating there from just the dogs going party time.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was stunned by the fact that I could go to Dog Beach, and I still do this on the darkest of days, and leave there feeling completely different. That the energy is almost contagious.
It's reminding me, I never even thought about it when I made a big move in life from Fort Collins, Colorado to Boulder, which completely transformed my life. It's an experience that I was stuck and it needed to happen. I think where I got my courage is every day going to the dog park. That is, I think,
Yes.
what filled me up and gave me that courage to make that move with my two dogs at the time, Pumpkin and Sawa. So can you tell us, going from there, you chose it didn't work out, but you chose what seemed like the coolest facility because your spirit knew that animals are part of your healing journey. And you ended up at, was it the Rosewood Equine Center or?
Rosewood Eating Disorder Treatment Center, and a big part of their program, one of the components of their program was equine therapy.
Yeah. Beautiful. But you didn't get to stay.
No.
You ended up, what happened, and then let's talk about how we started to meet, like how we ended up at the San Diego Humane Society from there.
Yeah. So unfortunately, my insurance dropped my coverage on day 2, and this happens with a lot of people. I work at an eating disorder treatment center now, and it's such a struggle for so many people that are willing and have come to that place where they really want treatment and want help. They can't get the coverage.
It's mind-blowing because they actually denied you coverage or cut off coverage because you weren't doing poorly enough.
Yes. Yeah, and because my weight wasn't low enough, and it was a really terrifying experience. And thankfully, Rosewood has a step-down program, what they call a step-down program. So it's not as intense as the rehab I initially went into, where you're monitored in the bathroom at every meal, even in your sleep. I had to learn how to make meals for myself. I wasn't monitored in the bathroom. There was a lot more freedom. And thanks to my mother who helped pay for it, I was able to stay there for 3 weeks. And after just 3 weeks there, I knew that I couldn't go back to the hotel. And I knew that I needed to find a job working with animals. It was undeniable to me that if I was going to, and while I was at Rosewood, I abstained from binging and purging for the first time for a month. So I felt more clear-headed and more connected to myself. And shortly after I got back from rehab, I saw a job at the zoo, which I really wanted, didn't get,
Yeah.
going for my Jane Goodall thing. But then an opening came for marketing coordinator at the San Diego Humane Society. And the job was essentially to try to help these homeless animals get adopted. So taking them on TV, local news stations, writing about them, putting their picture in the paper, writing magazine stories about them. And I got the job.
How much fun is that?
Oh, best job ever.
So then
Yeah.
tell us about Abby and Cheese Whiz.
Oh my gosh. Well, Abby was, she really looks like a hippo more than a dog. And she's just this big Staffordshire mix. She was one, the great thing about the San Diego Humane Society is at the time they were a nonprofit and funded by San Diego's pet loving community. So they had a lot of resources. So animals sometimes would stay there up to a year waiting for a home. We did not euthanize unless the animals were physically suffering and in pain or a danger to the community. So
and they
animals
had different rooms there, am I right?
Oh yeah, they had the Paris room, the New York room. Pro bono designers came in and designed each room with a theme. There were TVs set to Animal Planet, couches, toys, blankets. In one room, the Paris room, there was an enormous Eiffel Tower cat post. So it was an incredible and actually very joyful place, which I wasn't expecting going into animal welfare. And it still is today an incredible place. Anyone who's in San Diego should definitely go to the San Diego Humane Society. But Abby, unfortunately, because she was a pit bull, and there's stigma around that breed, and because she was a bit overweight, was in our care for a very long time. And so I ended up taking her on TV, a local TV station, KFMB Channel 8. And it was funny because she was just one of those dogs that seemed afraid of nothing. She just was so full of love and energy and pounced on you and got all 80 pounds of her in your lap, had no awareness of how big she was and just full of love. And so I'd always seen her being kind of larger than life. And when we got to the TV studio and opened the door to walk to the studio, she just sank to the ground and would not move. And she was not easy to move. But thankfully, by that point, I had been taking dogs on TV for a while, and I had the ultimate tool, which is Cheese Whiz. And I would essentially, the way I got her to the stage is I would squirt some Cheese Whiz in her mouth.
Yep.
Take a few steps back, squirt Cheese Whiz in her mouth, take a few steps back, all the way to the station. And then even when we got on air, I had to give her this huge bone that she just kind of mindlessly gnawed on just to keep her from freaking out about the lights and the cameras and everything going on. And I'm happy to say that Abby was adopted. And yes. And, something I did have a bit of an epiphany when I was there because, there was no reason for her to be afraid. She was so safe. I would never let anything happen to her. She was actually doing something that was going to help her find a home, but she didn't know it inside herself. And I didn't know exactly what she was so terrified of, only that she was terrified. And I realized, fear is just so beyond our rational mind. It's so much bigger than us at times. And my fear of gaining weight or being fat, I knew on an intellectual level that there were so many other things to be afraid of. I knew that there were families in America that had no food at home and were starving. I knew that there were people coming back from war. I knew that there were tragedies taking place, serious things to be afraid and upset about. And yet food was where my attention went. And I was ashamed of that. I was ashamed of how much, food and my fear of gaining weight controlled my life. but you don't get to pick what you're afraid of. Fear kind of picks you. And an eating disorder is a mental disorder. And so, I don't have to
And one that
understand.
has the number one fatality, from what I understand.
Yes. And it was just kind of this connection I made that, you know what, maybe I don't need to understand exactly why I've become this way, why I'm so freaked out over a piece of pizza.
Hmm.
Just like I don't understand why Abby can't, get off her butt and move towards the
Move
meat.
towards the light, Abby. Toward the
Yeah.
light.
It was just it paralyzes you.
Hmm.
And that's what my eating disorder did to me.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's really fascinating when you put it in that light. And I'm thinking of Abby now going on stage. Abby going on stage can change her life. It's not
Yes.
even a stage. It's not a big deal. You're in a studio.
Yeah.
But there's that moment of terror. And it sounds like for you and for many of us, when we're closest to getting the help we need is when we freeze up the most, or even cut off the help right before we get it.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
So it seems like a good segue. We're in the home stretch of positivity here, but you had a relapse, I understand.
I did. After a time of working at the Humane Society, I had close to a year of refraining from binging and purging, eating healthy meals and snacks. And I think that while I was experiencing a lot of physical recovery,
Hmm.
I still was I was struggling very deeply with the voices in my head. So, depressive voices, anxious voices. Um,
Like saying you're not good enough, things
I'm
like
not
that.
good enough. My dad was still suffering and I was grieving him, but I felt like you should be over this by now. Just this lack of compassion. I
Hmm.
had so much compassion for the animals, and yet I couldn't find any for myself. And, recovery, I think the two keys to recovery are surrender and compassion. So the ability to ask for help and then the ability to treat yourself with some compassion. And I just hadn't learned that yet. So I found myself in the worst relapse of my life. It lasted about 6 months. It's the only time in my life I experienced suicidal tendencies. It was just so devastating to me that I had come so far and
Hmm.
I really had felt so much freedom. And then it seemed like for nothing, I just gave it up. Danny, my boyfriend, moved out. He said, I can't live with you anymore. I thought it was only a matter of time before I'd end up back in rehab or worse. And there were just these powerful thoughts in my head that said, it doesn't matter. You're done. You're hopeless. Give up now. But then every morning, as those thoughts were happening, there were these other thoughts that were like, well, Abby needs to go on TV, or Stewie needs that story written about him. And I found myself getting up for the animals, knowing that it was my job to help them find a home. And even though I couldn't find any love for myself,
Hmm.
the love that I had for them carried me out of bed and into the day. And eventually, um, the relapse ended after 6 months, and it's been, sorry, my dog's playing in the
Yay,
corner.
that's cool.
And it's been more than 6 years since then.
Oh,
Freedom.
congratulations. Yay.
Thank you.
Is that when you met Sheba and Ranger?
Yes. Yes. Sheba and Ranger. So Ranger, well, we'll start with Sheba. Sheba was a beautiful shepherd with just black and gold fur, and her owner, who she'd lived her whole life with, and the dog companion she'd lived her whole life with, had both passed away. And so she was relinquished to the San Diego Humane Society. And dogs are intelligent, emotional beings. And she was unable to literally stand up, eat,
Hmm.
drink water. She just was, it seemed to me a lot more to do with um, sadness than anxiety, because I've seen both in dogs, and just something about her just had given up. And Then this stray dog named Ranger, who's just this big goofball, blonde coat, who was also a senior like her. I
Mhm.
believe she was, I can't remember her age exactly, but older. And then Ranger was about 11. And Ranger walked by her kennel one day, and it was the first time she lifted her head. And then
Very
a
cool.
volunteer told our behavior trainers about it, and they decided to try to take them on a walk together. And that was the first time that Sheba stood up. Then she began sleeping in the same kennel with Ranger, eating again with Ranger, and soon enough they were adopted together. And
Woohoo!
he brought her back to life. It was an incredible thing to witness.
Beautiful. So from there, at this point, you're starting to get on a roll here. Then you ended up moving to LA.
Yes. Yeah.
And that had to be a huge shift. And I think the shelter was like as different from night and day as you can get.
Yes. I was used to these wonderful rooms with TV set to Animal Planet and dogs staying in our care for a year, sometimes 2 years, to this shelter that was very run down. There was a euthanasia list. Animals only had a certain amount of time. Their kennels were outdoors in the hot summer sun,
Mhm.
nothing but a water bowl and a food bowl in there, no toys, no bedding, nothing. And it was quite a shock to find myself there. And yet, I think I knew at that point that I was meant to be there. And I think that I had gained some compassion for myself and an awareness that you can't run from suffering. And that sometimes softening your heart and opening your heart to pain is the only way through. And so I was less afraid of, I guess I was more confident in myself
How did
and
you?
in my abilities.
I got to pause you. How did you start to figure that out? That's huge.
Because I just knew I needed to be there. It was beyond mental words or concepts, beyond an intellectual knowing. It was,
Mhm.
you're born to do this, and you're strong enough to do this. And I have to say that as tough as it was to volunteer there, and I did it about 5 days a week for the year that we were there was so much joy. There was one day I saw this puppy just playing, having a ball with a leaf that had fallen
I
into
love
his
it.
kennel, and dogs that are in this kennel for 24 hours. They get 10 minutes outside in this crappy little
Woohoo! They're going.
park, and they don't waste a second of that saying, "Oh, woe is me and my life." They enjoy every second of it.
Mhm.
And it was eh, inspiring. And there were so many animals that were, they responded as I would if I were trapped in a cage. They began to deteriorate mentally and physically. They
Mhm.
began to shut down, be afraid of people. And yet with and this wasn't always the case, but so often it felt with just a little bit of love, a little bit of attention, they would begin to come out of their shell again. It didn't take much. And I was just so inspired by that resilience.
Yay. So who was Big Girl?
Oh.
Sorry.
That's okay. Big Girl was a very similar to Abby, red pit bull. And dogs usually were not at the shelter for more than a month. And she was a bit wild. And I I judged her based on how she behaved in the kennel. I had never seen her on a walk or
Mhm.
outside, and in her kennel, she was just a nutcase. She was, jumping up on her hind legs and barking and trying to dig her way out of there, and just all this energy, and weighed about 80 pounds. And one day I ended up walking her to a local dog park, and she saw something moving in the distance and ran towards it, and her collar broke in half, like literally
Wow.
just ripped apart. And she ran, and I thought, oh my God, there was cars everywhere. We as volunteers had been warned about, how important it was to have control over the dogs so they don't run into the streets. And there was part of me in that moment that thought, maybe just let her run. She's safer, um, free than taking her back into that shelter. And then another part of me thought, no, you've got to get her. So I called her name. And the amazing thing was that actually wasn't her name. She didn't have a name at the shelter. I called her Big Girl.
Mm-hmm.
That's just what I called her. So I yelled Big Girl, and she turned around running and came running back towards me. And I knelt down into the grass, and I was a little scared, but she just jumped on me, and I fell on my back with her with my arms around her. And she licked my face, and I ended up sitting there with her for a good 15, 20 minutes, waiting for another volunteer to maybe come by with a leash. And she didn't move from my side. She was the most serene, peaceful being, so different from how she was in that kennel. And I thought, I can get this dog adopted. This is her true personality. Mm-hmm. She's not that crazy dog I thought she was in the kennel. And I felt so confident that I would find her a home, or that she would find a home, because she was just a dog that's meant to be with people. Dogs and people have been partners before civilization even existed, living and working together before we even use speech. We have such a special partnership and ability to communicate with each other. And she was just one of those dogs that wanted companionship and a family. And sadly, I came to the shelter a few days later, and she wasn't in her kennel, and I found out that she had been euthanized. Yeah.
So let's go from there to a real positive story that I am just, the amount of strength it took to pull this off. Sunny.
Yes.
This is the exact opposite.
Yes. So Sunny was a 10-month...
And we sent you love, Big Girl, wherever we are.
We do. I still think about her a lot, and I'm really glad that you brought her up, because sharing her story makes me feel that I'm giving back to her and to her breed, which is just so terribly misunderstood. Mm-hmm. Sunny was another pit bull that was 10 months old, had a tail that was broken, like someone had taken a hammer to it, just like that, completely emaciated. And she was in the very back corner of the kennel, and of the shelter, mm-hmm. always with her nose through the bars, which was just, I think, as you were talking about with Abby, when we're struggling and suffering, so often we humans hide. We don't ask for help. We pretend everything's okay. We do whatever coping mechanisms we've learned, but she was just there every single time with her nose through the bars, reaching for help. Yeah. Reaching for love. Please come. And so I came to her kennel, and I realized that she was, not eating, not drinking. She was very stressed and traumatized. And yet over time, in this, horrific environment, she did the opposite of what most dogs would do and what I would probably do. Rather than breaking down, she actually began to heal. She started eating for the first time. Mm-hmm. And then I realized the reason that she wasn't drinking was because she was scared of her reflection in her own water bowl.
Wow.
And so, one day she kind of did this dance between, it was like 90 degrees out. She kind of kept going forward and backwards in front of the bowl. And I swear it was like she just stood over that bowl, and all of a sudden she just said, "Eff it." And she dunked her head in.
Go, Sunny.
And she drank and drank and she drank, and ever since then she conquered that fear. Mm-hmm. And so she began physically healing, and emotionally she was just such an affectionate, open, loving dog, and yet still ended up on the euthanasia list. And so I broke every rule in the book to rescue her.
At this point in the book, reading your book, my gut is twisted in two, and I'm like, I'm sending you so much energy. I'm going, you had resistance after resistance after scare after scare.
Yeah. There was even one time where I went away I was in grad school for a retreat and came back, and she wasn't in her kennel, and the staff told me that she had been euthanized. And I went to go to the bathroom to fall apart, basically, and saw her nose in another kennel. So she was in one of the kennels. She was going to be euthanized, but that was the point where I started telling a good lie, which was that I would take her, or I had a rescue group, and working for her rescue.
How did you get her rescued?
It's an amazing story. I at that time was I had gone on, and this actually isn't in the book, but to give you a little bit of perspective too, I had gone on antidepressants while I was at the Humane Society, and I went off them in Los Angeles, thinking that, I was doing so well with everything, and that maybe it would be okay. So I was experiencing that. My father was in jail at this point after getting into a horrible DUI accident, and I I was spending a lot of time at the shelter, and I was starting to, I guess, have urges again, urges to binge, urges to purge. I continue to go to 12-step meetings for that, and so I was going to those every now and then. And long story short, everything I tried to get her out of there had failed. We couldn't adopt her ourselves because my dog does not get along with other dogs in her habitat, and her habitat, that's what we called them at the San Diego Humane Society, in our apartment.
Yeah.
My boyfriend just was really concerned about the amount of space we had, and it was honestly, in the almost 10 years we've been together, the biggest fights we've gotten into were around that time. Me wanting to take Sunny out of the shelter, him being kind of the rational one and saying that this really isn't the time. And he's a huge animal lover too, so it was a really tough time for both of us. And on the day she was supposed to be euthanized, after all my attempts had failed to find a rescue group, to find a foster, I got a call from a woman named Alicia Stevenson. She runs a nonprofit called Project Unleashed, which brings shelter dogs into prisons to work with the youth there. And I was actually sitting in a drive-through when she called, about to relapse.
Wow.
Yeah. So I had just, I was so torn apart over this, and just could not find the strength to do the things I've learned to do to cope with my emotions in recovery, and was about to let it all go again. And I got that phone call. I pulled out of the drive-through.
I'm hearing angels.
Yes, I called the shelter. She was still alive. We got her out of there. And I had expected that it would be, Project Unleash would be kind of like maybe this kennel, or, rescue groups run on minimal funds. It's all volunteer efforts. And so I was quite surprised when she told me I could come visit Sunny, and that it was in Malibu. And so a few weeks after the rescue, I was driving past, just gorgeous home after gorgeous home, looking over the Pacific Ocean, and I came to this big gate, and the gate opened, and it was just, you just need to imagine dog heaven. It was just like bones and toys and lush dog beds, and a pond, and lots of dogs, and dogs that Alicia.
It sounds like space. Beautiful.
Room, and dogs that Alicia had rescued herself. And Sunny, I saw her as I pulled into the gate, and she had gained weight. Her tail even looked better.
Wow.
Everything about her was so healthy and vibrant. And I got to spend some time alone with her, and it struck me then that, and I think I hear this a lot with people that have grown up in families where there's addiction or alcoholism, that we kind of are always waiting for the ground to fall from beneath us. We're waiting for things to hit the fan. We're waiting for that, next bad phone call. And I think that it was really in that moment when I was laying with Sunny in the grass. She was happy and free, and she had gone swimming in a pond, which had rescue fish in it, by the way, rescue dog and rescue fish, that, sometimes it's okay to not plan for the worst. Sometimes it's okay to really dream big, to think, maybe this will not only work out, but work out beyond what I could have ever imagined. I'd never really let myself do that before because it seemed risky. Like, you're going to get let down. It's going to fall apart anyway. Why even believe in something that beautiful, that big, that awesome? And my attitude has really shifted from that day. I think this whole book resulted from that attitude, that change in my mindset that, what, maybe this is going to work out for me, and maybe this is going to work out for all of us, and just a more optimistic and hopeful point of view. And I attribute that to Sunny.
Oh, thank you, Sunny. And you're married now?
I'm married. Yes, Danny and I got married about 2 years ago.
Awesome, awesome. So from there, let's spend the last few minutes talking about pit bulls and rescuing animals. And I'm particularly interested in pit bulls. I told you off air before the show, lived on Maui just about the last 4 years before we came to the East Coast. And it's like the Maui dog. Everywhere you go, it's a pit bull. And they have the most beaming, the biggest smile possible. So while you see one side in the news telling you about one thing, and I want to understand that, but they're actually the most joyous, loving, to me, happy dogs. Like they're bred for happiness.
Yes, yes, and I think that in the 1980s, before the 1980s, when dog fighting started in America, they were, if you think of the Little Rascals, or you think of when people first started coming to America, pit bulls, and when we say pit bull, it's actually a culmination of many different breeds. Basically, we call a pit bull today anything that kind of has that bulky appearance and boxy head.
Mm-hmm.
But they're a variety of different breeds, and they were caretakers for children and families. They were a family dog in America. And actually, our first canine war hero was a pit bull.
I
And
didn't know
so
that.
they've been serving us humans and helping us and bringing so much joy and love into our lives for a long time. Dogfighting really got geared up in the 80s, and pit bulls are very loyal, obedient animals. And if they, when certain dogs were bred to fight, it's as dangerous as any big dog that is bred to do and trained, viciously trained, that they have to fight. Meaning, they'll be drowned if they don't fight. They'll be physically abused if they don't fight. That everything depends on their fighting. And and it just makes me so emotional to think about it, because it's just such a horrific tragedy, the number of dogs that have lost their lives to dogfighting. And so stories about dogfighting started to come up in the media in the 1980s,
Mm-hmm.
which was really a human-driven effort. And those stories got a lot of attention, a lot of media buzz, and unfortunately, people began associating every kind of bulky dog with a boxy head that they saw with those stories, when the reality is that every dog is its own being. And you cannot, just like you can't judge a person by their appearances and know who they are inside, you can't judge a dog that way. And
It's
grew
like
up with
racism. I never thought of it this way, but it's racism with dogs.
Exactly. And I grew up with a Bichon Frise. I mean, I knew nothing about pit bulls, and I was a little bit scared of them when I started working at the San Diego Humane Society. But I found in my darkest moments, and just on regular, ordinary days, they were the ones I was drawn to the most. I felt the most comfortable, the most safe, the most energized in their presence, because of that big smile you're talking about, because of their level of attentiveness and affection. And I think a part of me was also drawn to them for their resilience. And, it's just such a tragedy that the majority of dogs in shelters are pit bulls,
Mm-hmm.
and that people associate them with something that's really inaccurate and unfair. And so, I believe that as every person should have the opportunity to demonstrate who they are, so should every dog. And thankfully, breed specific legislation, such as, pit bulls not being allowed in a certain county or state, is slowly but surely fading away. Obama said it doesn't work. Um, More and more people are recognizing that we've really need to come together and support this breed, that we can make a change. And I actually just recently went to BadRap, which is an organization in San Francisco, a pit bull rescue group,
Mm-hmm.
and they rehabilitated some of the dogs in the Michael Vick dogfighting case. All of the dogs which fully recovered and went on to live beautiful lives. And I was there, surrounded by, I don't know, 6 or 7 pit bulls that were homeless and, but in the care of BadRap. And it just occurred to me that they, their resilience will rub off on us humans. You can't be around a dog that has been just all the odds against her or
Mm-hmm.
him, and yet still they continue to love, still they continue to play. It's not a matter of intelligence, because dogs are very intelligent creatures. They remember trauma. They will, we had a dog at the Humane Society that every time he saw a man in a white shirt, because dogs are very good at making associations, he freaked out. They don't forget, but they do overcome. And so I'm just, the rest of my life, I'm going to be a passionate pit bull advocate. And I think it's the least that I can do after all of the comfort and joy and inspiration they've given to me.
Are there places, is there a specific place people can go to find out more about helping pets?
Yes, definitely. There's several places. I mean, for one thing, if you go to your local animal shelter,
Yeah.
you will find pit bulls there, and you can. Um, so many shelters are dependent on volunteers, and volunteering with the animals, like I said, is not only good for them, but it can be good for you. And also, there's an organization called Best Friends Animal Society.
Mm-hmm.
If you Google them, Best Friends, that does a lot of great work on behalf of pit bulls and all kinds of rescue dogs. They have events all across the country that you can get involved with. There's also BadRap organization that I mentioned in San Francisco, that has a national presence, and the Humane Society of the United States.
Yay. Yay.
Yeah.
And then on that note, is there a place you would send people if they have an eating disorder?
Yeah. I think that a good place to start, there's the National Eating Disorders Association, NEDA, it's called. If you Google that, there's lists of treatment centers and therapists and places to get help. There's also 12-step meetings, and there's a really cool website that I love. It's called Recovery Warriors. And it offers places for you to get help, but it also offers a lot of inspiration, because recovery can be a long journey. And so I would say NEDA, Recovery Warriors,
Mm-hmm.
and local 12-step meetings are great places to start.
Would you have any words of wisdom for somebody who's in the trenches right now? And that's the hardest place to hear anything. But any words of wisdom you would give people?
Yeah, I think that I've come to learn in my own life that asking for help is the bravest thing I've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
And that opening my heart, softening my heart, is the path that I'm on today because of my struggles with bulimia. If I hadn't gone through it, I doubt I would be as compassionate as I am. I doubt I'd appreciate every day the way that I do. And at the time, when I was going into rehab or throwing up 20 times a night, I believed with all my being that I could never get better. I believed it so firmly that I even had suicidal tendencies and thoughts. And yet that's not the truth. And so if you are having those kind of thoughts, if you do feel hopeless, know that those thoughts aren't always true, aren't always real. And if there is a dog nearby, reach for her and
Yay.
put your arms around her and let that kind of love and non judgment um, touch your soul. It's like soul medicine. And I think that we all deserve it.
Beautiful. On that note, just a couple wrap up questions. I feel it's important to ask, what would you tell parents if they have a child with an eating disorder or suspect they may have one of their children has an eating disorder?
That education is so important. And my mother says they had a family weekend at Rosewood when I was there. And it was already 5 or 6 years into my disease, and she learned things she had never known. Ways that she was enabling me, ways that she could help me. And there's a lot of great organizations. NEDA has a lot of resources for families and friends. There's also what are called ANAD meetings, anorexia nervosa and associated disorders.
Mm-hmm.
These meetings are led by clinicians or therapists, but they're free and they're all over the country. They're for people struggling with eating disorders, but they're also for family and friends, loved ones that are dealing with someone that has an eating disorder in their life. It's a great place to find support. And I think that finding other people, like with any challenge we face in life, finding others that understand on an intimate level, on an authentic level, what you're going through can be really healing and powerful. So my advice would be to go to NEDA to get as much information as possible and then to find support for yourself. Um, those would be the two most important things.
Beautiful. Thank you. So, just a couple quick wrap up questions. One, I'm really excited to hear the answer of what personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
My dog.
Saw
And
that coming.
actually, I guess I should be more, it would be my husband and my dog.
Hmm.
All of us snuggled in bed in the moment, um, and just needing nothing, warm under the covers, and just being able to look into both of their eyes and know that there's so much love there.
Yay. So, where can people go to find out more and to find your book?
They can go to shannonkopp.com.
Hmm.
My website is actually going to have a whole new face in about a month or so, and lots of resources like we were talking about for those suffering from eating disorders and also those wanting to get involved in animal welfare. But the book's also available at Barnes& and Noble, Amazon, nationwide.
And whose smiley face is on the cover with you here?
That is Sunny.
What a smile.
I know, and she looks so good. She looks like a completely different dog from the one that I found in the back corner of the shelter.
Woohoo! So I can't recommend for people enough. Get pound for pound. Check it out. Get to your local shelter. I was telling you we don't have a place for a dog at the moment. We will eventually. And so we recently got 2 dog harnesses, matching dog harnesses for our future dogs, which will inevitably find us as soon as the time is right, and that'll come very quickly. Any
Right.
last words of wisdom you want to share with people on anything?
I just like to say thank you. I'm so grateful to be on this show and to be able to talk about something that was a secret for so long. Um, I guess the wisdom that is coming to me right now is just how beautiful it is to not be ashamed anymore. And I'm so glad that I've come to a place where I see eating disorders as a mental disorder, as an illness of mind, body, and spirit, and not as a personal weakness, not as a moral failure, not as something that is just based on appearances. It's much deeper than that. And I have a lot of compassion for myself and for everyone that's suffered from all forms of that disease.
Thank you. And I think that cannot be overstated. The fact of not being judgmental on yourself
Yes.
is huge.
Yeah.
So Thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for all the work you're doing and you continue to do. For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun. Check out Pound for Pound and get your own dog at the pound. Yeah. And shine bright. Woohoo!
Woohoo!
Thank you. This was, oh my heart, this was beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much. It was really, really beautiful.
Everyone, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!